In anticipation for Resident Evil Village, which releases in a little over 2 months from now, I've decided to play one of the main series of games a week and give a little bit of a recap of what happens in each of the stories. And what better way than to start off with the original game? Because I could start with Zero, but to be honest, I really don't like Zero all that much, so I'm going to do that at a later point. Use a little graphic to, beg you to subscribe. That'd be really nice, but there you go. 5 seconds of begging. That's enough. Alright, let's get right into it. The first thing to know is that Resident Evil has two main storylines. You pick between Jill and Chris, and while the stories aren't all that different, there's a few interesting minor differences that you get from playing the different perspectives. So for the sake of keeping this concise, I'm just going to play through Jill's scenario, but I'll explain some of the differences in Chris's scenario as they come up. So, regardless of who you pick, the story starts the same way. You get a little narration of these accidents that have been happening in the Arklay Mountains that result in people being eaten alive, and you're part of the STARS team. This is an acronym for Special Tactics and Rescue Service. It's a elite division of the Raccoon City Police Department. A team had been sent in to investigate prior to you, but they went quiet, and you're there to investigate. And as soon as you get there, you see their crashed helicopter, and the only person there is Kevin. We don't really know who Kevin is. He's just a guy who was on the STARS team, and he's dead. Shortly after that, the team's attacked by a bunch of zombie dogs, and as they're running through the forest, they see a mansion to take cover in, since there's too many dogs to take out. And this mansion, as it has become pretty famously known, is where pretty much the entirety of the game will take place. Once you enter the mansion, Jill gives a little narration saying she, Barry, and Wesker are the only STARS members left. They don't know where Chris is. In Chris's scenario, this is a little different. Chris shows up with Jill and Wesker, and Barry is the one that they don't know the whereabouts of. And it's important to know that Wesker is essentially their captain. He's the one giving them orders in this situation. So Wesker, being the great captain he is, tells Barry and Jill to go check out the dining room, and he'll stand around in the foyer doing something important, I'm sure. And as soon as the two enter the dining room, Barry decides to investigate some bloodstains on the floor and send Jill on to do the fun investigating on her own. This is when Jill runs into her first zombie, or as they will refer to them for a long time, just monsters. She runs away, and Barry takes him out, and the two go back to report what they saw to Wesker. But when they get back to the foyer, they see that Wesker's gone. Surely he had some important business to take care of. And Barry comes up with the great idea of splitting up to check the mansion. So after finding a map in the first room she checks, Jill's pretty much on her own to unravel the mysteries of this mansion. She does run into Barry a few times and has a few awkward encounters, but other than that, she doesn't get much help from anyone else. But despite having pretty much no directions, she manages to find a ton of useful supplies, herbs for healing, handgun ammo all over the mansion, and eventually she finds a secret underground passage leading to this strange chamber with a giant coffin chained up to the ceiling. Underneath this coffin, there's a book of curses. Of course, she takes the book and reads it, and it tells her that if she collects these 4 masks and put them on these pedestals behind her, evil will be awoken. Despite that not sounding like a very good idea, that is now Jill's main objective. There's also a key embedded in the Book of Curses. It has a sword engraving on it. Prior to this, Jill had seen a ton of doors with different engravings of swords, armor, and stuff like that that she couldn't lockpick due to their unique locks. So, presumably, and correctly, she's able to open all the locks that have a sword engraving on them now. In these new areas, she's able to find the 4 masks, as well as various notes left by former residents of the mansion. She learns things like the zombies can only really be killed if you destroy their brain or if you burn their corpse. And you quickly find out that this is true because if you visit a room that you've killed a zombie in prior, there's a chance that it'll stand up and come at you even faster than before. You find out the name of these zombies later, but for the sake of, not forgetting this information, I'll go ahead and tell you that these zombies are called Crimson Heads. The Crimson Heads have a red skin tone and grow claws and sprint much faster than a regular zombie. So with this new information, Jill proceeds to find the 4 masks. The order in which they're found varies from playthrough to playthrough, but I'll just say it in the order that I found them. First mask is guarded by a vicious plant that can only be passed if you find herbicide and dump it into the water and then turn on the sprinklers to kill it. This is probably the most simple mask of the 4, so it makes sense to grab this one first. Next, after Jill finds a dog whistle, she's able to blow on the whistle and summon a dog that had been holding a fake key that would help her unlock the real key to all the armor doors. All rather convoluted, but in the end, once you figure it out, she's now able to open even more doors and get to the rest of the masks. Eventually she runs into Richard, another STARS member that's taking shelter in the house. And at this point, it's up to you to decide if Richard is worth saving. The game has a set time that it gives you to run and grab the serum from the other side of the mansion to go and save Richard. And me being the nice person I am, I sent Jill to go get the serum, and I saved his life. After a few more berry encounters and a few more dog chases, I find yet another key that opens the door to where the snake had bitten Richard. With this key, Jill's finally able to get the mask that the snake is guarding. And since she was a good Samaritan and saved Richard, he joins in the fight against the snake to make it a little bit easier to go and get the mask. Now at this point you could help Richard out and fend off the snake, but there's really no point since it won't actually die, so I figured it'd be best just to leave. After all, Richard is a pretty capable guy.
No!
The last two masks involve solving simple puzzles. The first one involves moving giant statues back and forth to figure out how to get them all to stay backwards. Once they've all been locked into place, Jill can open up the container and get the next death mask. The final death mask is behind another locked door that you can get into using the armor key. It's a pretty simple stained glass puzzle, and once it's done it opens up back into the graveyard, conveniently located right next to where the masks need to be put. Once all masks are placed on their proper pedestals, the coffin falls from the ceiling, and inside Jill finds a Crimson Head. This Crimson Head has a lot of health and is difficult to take down, however I trusted in Jill's ability to run in circles and shoot him. However, that was a mistake because I died, and ended up having to get the masks again because I didn't save. Returning with much better weaponry, the fight gets a lot easier. And once the Crimson Head's taken out, Jill finds a medallion within the coffin. Since this is a pretty important milestone in the game, I'll go ahead and mention some of the differences that are in Chris's story up to this point. His goal is the same as Jill's, it's to get the masks. However, the order in which he finds keys and does certain things are different. The biggest difference is that Barry does not appear throughout Chris's story, instead he interacts with Rebecca. She's a member of the Bravo team that went missing at the beginning of the game. She's a very different character from Barry, but for pretty much everything that happens with Barry, Rebecca kind of has a similar interaction with Chris. But regardless, in both Jill and Chris's story, after killing this Crimson Head, they get this medallion and are able to go into the forest outside of the mansion. While exploring the outside of the mansion, Jill receives a weak radio transmission from Barry. All that Jill is able to hear is that there's a monster in the forest with chains wrapped around it. But at this point, Jill's no stranger to monsters, so she enters this creepy cabin deep in the woods. And just as you might expect, this cabin is the home of that monster that Barry was mentioning. But with her elusive movements of a special trained officer, she's able to evade the monster and get out of the cabin. Like many things in this game, this creature is really only explained through in-game notes. Throughout the course of the game, Jill finds a bunch of notes that are written in very poor handwriting, which is by this creature. And as she eventually finds out, this creature was once a little girl. The girl's name's Lisa Trevor, and the Trevors do play an important part in the story that is only seen through reading documents. Rather than explaining all the notes as they come up, I think it's best just to explain the Trevor's role right now. Basically, George Trevor is a famous architect, and he's hired by someone to build this mansion that Jill and Chris are in. He's asked to make it as elaborate as possible and add plenty of confusing locks and contraptions to lead to secret rooms. His employer allows him, his wife, and his daughter to stay in the mansion. However, the people who employed him end up performing experiments on his wife and daughter. The results of these experiments are seen here with what has happened to Lisa. After escaping from Lisa, Jill makes her way to a smaller house near the outside of the mansion. In the house, she hears Barry talking to someone, but when she opens the door, he's all alone and says that age must be getting to him, and that he's just been talking to himself recently. And Jill's not one to doubt her friends, so she just goes along with it. And as she's accustomed to by this point, she explores the rest of this new house by herself. She finds a secret passage leading to an underground facility. And it's here that she finds sharks that have also been experimented on. She manages to drain all the water out of the facility, and she manages to take out a massive shark that was guarding a key to a room she couldn't get into. After a little bit of exploration, Jill finds a file. This file details the chemical mixings needed in order to destroy this plant that's been all around this new residence that she's exploring. After encountering the main body of the plant for the first time, she goes and starts mixing the chemicals to make V-Jolt, which should slowly kill the plant. Now the player actually has two choices here. You can just fight the plant and kill it with your weapons, or you can make the V-Jolt and kill it that way. Since making the V-Jolt's not that hard once you actually know how to do it, I decided for the sake of this playthrough I would just beat it this way. It is worth noting that through Chris's playthrough, the only way to make V-Jolt is to have Rebecca make it for you. And there are certain scenarios in which Rebecca won't be able to make it for you, and this involves having Richard live even longer and make it to the residence with you. So yes, there was a way to save Richard and bring him this far. However, regardless of if you do that or not, he finds a way to die anyways. But anyways, as soon as Jill's done making the V-Jolt, she goes and applies it to the source of the plant. All should be well and good, but when she returns to the main body of the plant, it turns out it's not actually dead. But lucky for Jill, the master of convenient timing shows up, and Barry's there to help her with his flamethrower that he apparently has been carrying around. After another awkward conversation with Barry, Jill finds the last key she needed in the main mansion, the helmet key. And while returning back to the main mansion, she runs into Wesker. Wesker brings up the fact that Barry's been acting kinda weird lately, and like the great leader he is, he tells Jill to go back to the mansion and open up any doors that couldn't be opened before. While she's on her way back, she receives a radio transmission from Brad, the helicopter guy who left everyone behind at the beginning of the game. Brad begs anyone from the Alpha or Bravo team to give him a sign, but Jill's radio isn't working, so she can't get back in contact with him. As she approaches the mansion, Jill runs into a new creature known as Hunters. They're reptilian beasts that are much faster and much more dangerous than zombies, and as she'll soon find out, they're now roaming all of the halls of the mansions as well. Once she gets back to the mansion and starts unlocking the new rooms, she starts to uncover what actually is going on at the mansion. She finds a document saying that Stars was intentionally led to this mansion. They were meant to be used as test subjects against a BOW. This term will become commonplace in the Resident Evil universe, and it stands for Bioorganic Weapon. The note also explains a plan to destroy all evidence of there ever being any testing on humans or animals at the mansion. And the end of the note is signed by the Umbrella Corporation. Umbrella is a big pharmaceutical company in the world of Resident Evil, and their experimentations with viruses is completely unknown to the whole world. Continuing her search of the other locked rooms, Jill runs back into the giant snake that killed Richard. And for Richard's sake, the snake is finally defeated. With its dying breath, it knocks over a bookshelf and reveals a strange medallion. The purpose of this medallion is yet unknown, but as Jill continues to explore the other locked rooms, she finds yet another medallion, but this time one of a different color with a different animal. With this medallion, Jill finds the final diary entries of George Trevor. It's revealed that Umbrella planned on killing George Trevor all along after they were done using him, and even though he knows he'll soon die, he hopes that his wife and daughter are still okay. After checking a few more rooms, Jill heads back out to the outside of the mansion. It's here that she finds a secret passage that was hidden by a waterfall, and behind it lies branching tunnels going deep underground. After exploring for a while, she runs into another STARS member, Enrico. Enrico tells Jill that Umbrella set him up, and that there's a traitor among the STARS members. Just as he's about to tell her more, he gets shot from behind. However, Jill doesn't really seem to care to turn around and see who shot him, and the perpetrator gets away. Down yet another team member, Jill goes back to exploring the tunnels, and she runs into a giant spider, yet another test subject of Umbrella's experiments. After taking out the abomination, Jill finds a way to power up an elevator to travel even further into the underground tunnels. Just as she's about to descend the elevator, Barry shows up. The two catch up a little bit, and then they head down into the depths of the tunnels. At the bottom, Barry decides he'll secure an escape route in case anything comes for him, and he tells Jill to go on and explore by herself. Right as she begins searching the tunnels, she runs back into Lisa Trevor. Knowing her elusive movements can only get her so far, she runs back and gets Barry's help. However, just as she reaches Barry, Barry takes the elevator and ditches her. Jill, however, is able to escape Lisa without Barry's help, and on her escape route, she runs into Lisa Trevor's room. The room is actually located underneath the cabin where she first met Lisa, and it's filled with children's dolls and other toys. It's in here that she finds out what happened to all the Trevors. Lisa's mother was infected with a virus, however it didn't react as they expected, so they disposed of her. George Trevor, as we already knew, was disposed of after his usefulness ran out, and Lisa was also infected with the virus, however she was kept around due to the unique way that she reacted to it. Also in this room is a series of notes left by Lisa. You can see her mental state degrade as the notes progress through time. However, Jill finds out that she's now obsessed with finding her mother and returning her face to her mother, which is what she has been wearing this whole time. Pretty gross. The last thing Jill finds in here is a stone object that will help her open the last locked door in the mansion. And seeing that she doesn't have many other options on what to do, that's exactly what she heads off towards. The door leads her to an underground passage where she runs into Barry once again. Now knowing that Barry's up to something, Jill quickly disarms him, but at the same time Lisa Trevor reappears. There are now two paths to take. Jill can either give Barry his gun back or keep the gun. Keeping the gun will result in Barry's death, and since that's not the canon ending, I'm going to give it back to him in this instance. And just as a side note, in Chris's scenario, he meets Wesker down here, rather than Barry or Rebecca. With Barry distracting Lisa, Jill's able to push these 4 rocks off the edges of the platform they're on. This causes the coffin in the middle of the platform to open up, and it just so happens that the person inside the coffin is Lisa Trevor's mother, Jessica. Having finally found her mother, Lisa picks up Jessica's skull and promptly jumps off the platform with her, presumably killing herself in the process. However, Barry, as well as I myself, am not so sure that she's dead. Even though she's never made a return in any of the Resident Evil games, I still kinda hope that maybe one day she'll show up somehow. But anyways, in typical Barry fashion, he sticks around to check out the area, and Jill goes on by herself. She runs into a fountain outside the mansion, and in this fountain, she finally finds a way to use those medals that she found earlier in the mansion. When placed in their corresponding indentions in the fountain, the medals reveal a secret path to the mansion that she's read so much about in various documents up to this point. Jill learns even more about the experiments taking place here through documents scattered throughout the lab. She also learns that the outbreak of the virus was too much for them to handle, and that's why all the scientists have already turned into zombies themselves. Eventually she finds a projector that shows all the different creatures that Umbrella has been experimenting on, and she also finds a picture of the development team of the virus. And what do you know, her squad leader Wesker is on that very development team. Back to exploring, Jill finds that Chris has been held in a prison cell underneath the lab. And of course, in Chris's story, Jill ends up being in this cell in the place of Chris. And the only way to get the trapped person out of the cell is to collect these 3 MO discs. But of course, the true ending does involve saving either Jill or Chris, depending on who you're playing as, so that's what I do here. But before Jill can save Chris, she has to find a way to release the electronic lock. She eventually meets back up with Barry, and the two head up the elevator to explore more of the area. However, the two run into Wesker, and it's here that Wesker reveals that he's been blackmailing Barry by threatening his family to get him to cooperate with him. Wesker reveals that he's planning on blowing up the mansion and all the creatures within it, and he explains that the true creation that he's interested in is the new tyrant that he's developing. Wesker punches Jill with some comedic sound effects. Stirred. And just as he's about to kill her, Barry steps in and decides that he's done betraying his friends. Barry shoots Wesker, but however that's not enough to kill him because he has enough time to release the tyrant. The tyrant doesn't act as Wesker expects because it incapacitates both him and Barry, leaving only Jill to fight the tyrant. She's able to knock the tyrant down after a little bit of fighting, and after helping Barry back to his feet, the two start to head out. As they're heading towards the exit, a self-destruct message starts playing throughout the laboratory. Barry assumes that it's Wesker who's done this because the two couldn't find his body after Jill took down the tyrant, but it's not really clear who activates the self-destruct sequence in this scenario, because in Chris's scenario, Jessica, who never betrays Chris, goes and sets off the self-destruct sequence on her own. If you couldn't tell by this point, both of the stories cannot happen simultaneously for various conflicting events. However, it is kind of strange that you never see Rebecca throughout the entirety of Jill's playthrough. Regardless of who sets off the self-destruct sequence, Jill heads back down to Chris and gets him out of his cell, and she, Chris, and Barry head to the helipad located outside of the lab. Conveniently enough, there's signal rockets on the helipad for her to signal Brad to come and pick them up, but they're not out of it just yet, because the tyrant makes yet another appearance, and this time he's much more powerful than before. Jill and Barry fight the tyrant on their own since Chris is taken out pretty quickly. However, the tyrant doesn't seem to be fazed by any of the weapons that Jill's using. Just as hope seems lost of being able to actually kill the tyrant, Brad shows up, and he begins a tradition for Resident Evil games. He drops a rocket launcher from the sky, and Jill uses that to actually kill the tyrant. And with that, the three of them make it out alive just before the mansion explodes. Of course, Rebecca also makes it out of the mansion, however, this ending does not show that. Like I said, it's kind of confusing how both stories do happen because you see all these characters in later games, but neither of the stories really make sense when you play them side by side, but you know, whatever. So that was the story of Resident Evil 1. I didn't mention every single detail, and obviously there are certain parts of Chris's story that I did omit, but I feel like that was a pretty thorough explanation of how the story went overall. Hopefully I'll be able to keep this up at a week's pace before Resident Evil Village comes out, so you know, hopefully sometime next week Resident Evil 2 recap will come out. Feel free to motivate me by subscribing and liking the video, but if not, that's fine. I know you still care. This has been Resident Evil Recapped. Until next time.